the Sterling Heights Public Library. I'm Brent, and today we are going to talk a little bit about how to sharpen and maintain your knives. You've probably heard me mention on a couple of occasions about how important it is to have a nice sharp knife. This is very true, but if you've never learned how to sharpen a knife, it takes a little bit of practice, but certain tools can make this actually a lot easier. So come on down to the board and we'll touch on a couple of different types of things here and give you an idea of how these things work. So one of the first things that you should have if you're going to be having knives around, get yourself a steel. Now this here is not actually a sharpener. You'll see people using these periodically, and sometimes people refer to them as a sharpener, and a lot of them do actually have a little bit of an abrasive on the surface. But what this is really there to do is it's to align the edge of the knife, keep it nice and straight, and when you get to that really fine little edge on here, one of the reasons they get dull is that they have a tendency to get kind of out of alignment. So this helps you align that. So basically how you use this, you may want to come up a little bit with the camera, hold it in your offhand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold it in my left hand. You're going to take your primary knife, get yourself a nice grip on it, and you're going to bring that down, blade towards this way, okay? Now you're not going to use a lot of pressure, a little bit. You're going to hold that. Most typical Western knives are ground at about a 20-degree angle, so you don't want a real aggressive angle on it, but you don't want to be fully parallel to the thing either. So you want to bring that in, and you can kind of feel how it works. And what that's going to do is after a few strokes, that is going to align this little edge at a very, very fine level, and you'll be able to see, well, not probably with the naked eye, but you'll be able to see a difference in how these things cut. Now, you will see sometimes people do reckless things with, how to test the edge of a knife. You will see people test them with their thumbs sometimes. Not the greatest idea in the world. You get a little bit too crazy with that and you get a really sharp knife, you can wind up with stitches. So a safe and easy way to check a knife to see if it's sharp, get yourself a piece of paper. And if that knife goes right through that paper easily, then it's pretty sharp. Now you may have noticed that one kind of caught a couple of times, and that's because this knife could actually use a little bit of a touch-up. It's pretty good, but not fabulous. So, a couple of different tools we can use to actually sharpen a knife. One of the simplest and most basic that you're going to find and easiest to use is something along these lines here or this here. This basically, these are two different versions of the same type of principle. What you got in here is you've got two little ceramic rods that cross each other at a set angle. Now this one here, I don't even remember where I got this, but it was very inexpensive. I got it at some kind of a kitchen store somewhere, and it's actually got a coarse side and a fine side, which are labeled. They're very, very small and not real easy to read. So I don't know that you can see that on the camera, but there is actually two different settings on this here. So you always start with the coarse side, which in this case is this side. And then basically just basically going to bring that down through there, nice and straight. And you can kind of feel and hear when it starts to smooth out a little bit. You're not using a lot of pressure on this, okay? When it starts to get a little bit of improvement on there, you can flip it over to the fine side and give it a little bit more, and you may actually be able to hear how that is changing as we run that through there. Now if you get real aggressive with one of these things, you can actually do some damage to the edge of your blade here. You do not want this thing to start going concave, even at a very, very small degree, because that interferes with when you're chopping. You'll wind up with a gap between the board and the edge of the knife, and things don't cut that way. So let's see if we've got a little bit of improvement here. A little bit. So again, this is good for maintenance. Something like this here is a little bit fancier, a little bit bigger, a little bit more expensive, and this is actually adjustable. Again, I have no idea where I got this from, but it may have actually been a gift at some point. But again, it has a coarse and a fine setting. There actually is an adjustable dial here for angle, because different knives do have different grind angles on them. But again, run it through your coarse a few times before switching over to your fine. And there actually is a setting, a notch in here for serrated knives. Most serrated knives are actually almost impossible to sharpen. Most of them don't actually need very much sharpening, but something like this here is one of the very few ways you can sharpen a serrated knife if it does start to get dull. If this thing gets to a certain point, you buy a new one. But you can run that down through here, and that will help. A couple of the reasons for serrations on these: the teeth actually do help, but these little scallops here actually lengthen the amount of cutting surface you have to the knife, so it does cut very aggressively. These are really good for doing bread. If you need to slice tomatoes or lemons thinly, this is also very handy for that. And a little bit longer version is probably the most fantastic thing you can find for cutting whole cakes. So let's see if a couple of strokes of that made a difference. Yeah. Still got a little bit of a hang up in there, but a whole lot better. Now, if you've got one that really has a little bit of, needs a little bit of work, you may need yourself a sharpening stone. Now, this thing here belonged to my grandfather. It is older than I am. I have no idea how old it actually is, but this is a very handy thing to have around. You can still buy these things. You'll often hear them referred to as a whetstone. That is not W-E-T, W-H-E-T. So when you're using one of these, you're going to need some honing oil, okay? Now, pretty much any light gauge mineral oil will work. You do not want to use like a food oil, like a vegetable oil, or olive oil or anything like that, because those do have a tendency over time to gum up, and that will actually cause problems with your stone. So you do want to use some oil on this. As you're working this, get a little bit of oil on the stone, and you always want to work a knife towards you, the direction of the angle. You don't want to come away from it. You want to go into it. And there's a little bit of an arc on this, so keep that in mind. You want to have a nice, even stroke. You do not need a lot of pressure on this, but try to keep strokes in both directions even. You don't want to try and do a whole bunch on one side and then a whole bunch on the other. Alternate your strokes. If you've actually got dings or nicks in the blade, you may have to go to one of these things right off the bat. This actually will repair a damaged edge. And again, you may have seen me mention before that you want to have something underneath your board to keep it steady. Same goes with if you're using one of stone like this here. Damp paper towel works really well. Now, you had a few strokes on that. You are going to find that, see that color there? That comes from the edge of the metal there. You do want to clean this oil off before you actually use this for anything as far as food goes. This does take a little bit of practice. I'm going to actually give that a couple more strokes in here. A little more oil. But you want to maintain a nice even pressure, and most important thing, you want to have a consistent angle, because if your angle's changing, you're going to be creating all kinds of problems. Yeah, not bad. When you're done with the actual sharpening, clean your stone off. You've been using one. And then you don't want to forget to give it a couple of strokes on the steel. That will just clean up any weirdness on there. Yeah, so no joke. Anytime you're playing around with sharpened steel, always be careful. I've got one more thing I want to show you here, and the main reason I want to show you this is because this is a complicated mess. I've had this for years. It can work. It's more trouble than it's worth. The way this thing actually works, we've got a base here. Your knife clips into this clamp. This thing here goes up into one of these. You oil the stone, and it helps you maintain your angle. Don't waste your time.